Thank you very much. Today I'm going to talk about the health risk associated particularly with consumption of imported shrimp into Europe, looking at the reality in terms of risk assessment versus the media claims. So this work was commissioned by the Seafood Importers and Processors Alliance, and what we wanted to do was assess the risk from consuming shrimp imported to Europe, assess the media claims associated with consuming imported shrimp, and assess whether these claims are justified and whether the public information is accurate in these contexts. So, in general terms, the public have quite a negative perception concerning consuming tropical shrimp. Do these perceptions reflect evidence from shrimp production? And is the media responsible for perpetuating a negative narrative around consuming farmed shrimp? And also, can the evidence that we've got be used to advise a recommended daily intake of shrimp that is safe? So, moving swiftly on, because I don't have much time for this, the evidence was obtained from the EU's Rapid Alert System for Food and Feed, as we were hearing about before, which provides detailed notifications of batches of imported goods that have failed EU regulations. Particularly, you can see the species, the violation, the notifying country, and also it tells you the country of origin. So we took this data and we categorized it into 7 contamination categories, as you can see there, and also traceability issues as well, which linked to poor documentation and labeling, etc. And we also, where possible, we characterized the species into whether they were farmed or wild, according to the statistics on production that's available from the FAO, which is not always possible because of the production of wild shrimp and farm shrimp, sometimes from the same country, the same species. So we also did a media search using the Nexus Media database, and we looked at European newspapers with the word shrimp in the headlines in German, Spanish, French and English, and we collated all of these stories from that were related to shrimp value chains. And then we took this data and we looked at every individual story and we categorized these into different themes to do with public health, traceability, and then for context we also looked at economic issues, social responsibility and environmental impact. And we characterized the stories whether they were positive, negative or neutral. And we also compared this to data that was available on the internet concerning farmed shrimp. And then we used the data that's available within the RASFF database to try and work out an ADI for shrimp consumption, which I should stress is only based on the violations. It's not based on what is available to consumers, which is quite different, of course. So the good news is that we can see that as imports of farmed shrimp to Europe have increased, then the number of alerts due to contamination have decreased at the same time, so that in the last few years there's only been between 5 and 10 alerts per 100,000 tonnes of imported shrimp product into the EU. If we look at how this relates to the different categories of violation, we can see that this has not only tracked production practices and processing practices, but it also tracked EU regulations and practices in terms of how we test for these contaminants through time. So up until 2001-2, there were much more bacterial violations than in 2002, as we established the European Food Standards Agency, and more tests were developed for things like chloramphenicol and nitrofurans. Then a lot more antimicrobial alerts occurred, and then in response to decisions which meant that the imports from certain countries were banned, these countries cleaned up their acts, and these antimicrobial alerts then dropped, and then we started seeing more alerts due to things like additives and other issues. And particularly as we go on into more recent times, many more additives and then more alerts due to spoilage issues. If we look at this per country, we can see that Asia is responsible for much more of the bacterial and antimicrobial alerts, and in Europe we see many more alerts due to additives, particularly excess of sulfite. And the curious story behind sulfite is that in about 2006 the law was changed, but previous to that you had a different upper limit for sulfite in raw produce compared to cooked produce. So you could import raw produce from Asia, which passed and had no violations, then cook it in Europe, and because the limit was lower for cooked produce than raw produce, then it'd be re-exported to another European country and fail. And then in 2006, the RISSF and the European regulations were aligned so that raw produce and cooked produce had the same maximum sulfite level. So looking at data for the maximum amount allowable daily intake, the data shows from the RISF database that in fact farmed shrimp is no less safe than wild shrimp. Actually, it looks like farmed shrimp is a little bit safer to consume. But however, this is got to be taken in context that this is just the data from the RISF database. It's not data that's taken from supermarket samples or that's available to the consumer. Another thing to notice is that the max levels are much, much higher than the mean and median levels, and we think that this may be some mistake within data recording or in the analytical process itself, and we wonder how much checking there is within the people that carry out these tests. Particularly, we were interested in looking at this farmed versus wild produce because a lot of people are advocating that we should be eating more local wild produce instead of farmed produce, which goes against what our data shows. Particularly, we've seen that antimicrobials have shown up in wild produce, which is counterintuitive because you wouldn't think that wild shrimp should contain any antimicrobials in their production process. So why do you find antimicrobials in wild produce available to EU consumers? So the first thing is natural occurrence. Is it that wild shrimp are harvested from areas in proximity to where there's a lot of farming going on and there are residues within the environment? Is there natural synthesis? There's some evidence to suggest that particularly metabolites of nitrofurans occur naturally within the shells of shrimp. Also, there's some evidence to suggest that chloramphenicol is naturally occurring, particularly it's found in bacteria, found to be produced from bacteria which are found in soils, and some of these same species of bacteria have also recently been found in marine environments, so it's possible that chloramphenicol is naturally occurring. The next one, of course, is mislabeling. To do with price fraud, which you've heard a lot about in some of the other sessions, and one speculative possibility that we're working on is that after emergency harvesting due to a disease event in a farmed environment in Asia, then these shrimp may have been exposed to antimicrobials, but because they're emergency harvested, they're smaller than would be expected, and therefore there's some either intentional mislabeling to show that they're not farmed or that they're mistakenly labelled as wild shrimp because of their size. So looking finally at the media analysis, we can see that the media articles reasonably match what's been happening in the alerts. The big peak in media articles to do with health and traceability occurred in 2002, and then there was a subsequent decline. So the mainstream media reasonably matches what's going on in terms of the alerts. And then if we look at the other issues, there seems to be very little change, and we can see that later on there's more concern with social responsibility and traceability issues. And this is different between different countries. Areas that have more wild production themselves then maybe have more issues related to their economics, the economics and sustainability producing particularly nephrops in Britain has been a big issue. So I'm running out of time, so just moving on quickly to the websites. We can see that this is very different from what's available on the internet. Public perception is much more negative on the internet. There are very, very few positive sites concerning shrimp production, farm shrimp production, and where there are positive stories, these tend to be from certification bodies which are trying to promote their own certification schemes. And because I've run out of time, I'll just move on to the conclusions, which show that in general, alerts have declined for shrimp imports to Europe, and this shows that shrimp is actually becoming safer to eat. Some countries have some periodic alerts in some countries where they don't have such good enforcement of their traceability schemes and their monitoring schemes, particularly in their labs. The mainstream media generally reflects what's happening regarding RISSF alerts, but the internet and blogosphere tends to have a multiplying effect on the negative issues, in essence in a sort of echo chamber where they're repeating the same negative narrative over and over again. And finally, the industry needs to do a better job in communicating the positive aspects of producing farmed shrimp rather than kind of damage limitation exercise, which is perhaps what they have been doing in the past. So thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you for presenting this interesting survey. Are there questions? Please, use the microphone. Here or there?
Oh, thank you very much.
Thank you for... Hello? Hello? I don't know which data year you used in analyzing the rapid alert. I think it is not very recent, because if you can go back to the slides.
I don't think I can, because it's on a new presentation.
Especially, I'm from Bangladesh, and in Bangladesh, from the shrimp European rapid alert, it was hike in 2009, and it was because of basically the nitrofuran chloramphenicals and its testing protocol. It was in the laboratories they used the carapace, I think, whole shell-on testing protocol. That was the main cause of the main detection. And after that, from 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14, and in 15, there was no rapid alert. In 16, it is 2 rapid alerts was there, but it was finally, it was not real, finally. So the trend was very different than you showed there.
No, it's not true. There was only 4 or 5 alerts from all imports in the last few years.
But it showed I think it showed the Bangladesh, India, and other places, especially because I'm concerned with Bangladesh. So maybe it is the data is maybe 2 or 3 years or more back.
It was data that was tracked from 1997 up until 2015. So it was
average?
It was a timeline. It included Bangladesh, all alerts coming into Europe. So it includes Bangladesh within there, but it's alerts from all countries. Bangladesh isn't singled out at any point.
Maybe it is average. Then it can be, I think. But
I think
from 2013, it is very declining, and in 2015 there was no rapid alert. 16, only 2, but it is mitigated
Sure.
already. So this development, please.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I agree with you. Absolutely, there are far fewer alerts now than there were before.
Yes, but thank you. I think you thought this. I think whatever we think of the shrimp, especially aquaculture product, in the consumer's view, it might be not the, I think, real view. It's maybe more safer than what we think.
Yes.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah, and this brings me to another question. You know, this is what you found out. It's the situation is better, and one of your conclusions is the industry should announce that the situation is better. So we know from social science, you know, if you tell the people that you are doing better work now, nobody will believe you. So what would your recommendation, you know, because you need allies, you know, who transport this message. You
Yeah.
know, what do you think? How would be the future of communication on the quality and on the quality and the food safety of shrimps?
I went to another presentation in one of the other sessions today, and it was about wild abalone from Australia and how they were competing against Chinese farmed abalone, and it showed that they just need to have a consensus and they need to work together as an industry and have a combined strategy between all of the parts of the value chain to promote it better. I think that doesn't happen. If you look on websites and supermarket websites, any producer or processing websites, they very much downplay the fact that any of their produce is farmed at all. So I think the retailers, especially, they'll run a mile when they hit a negative story. So the producers and the processors have to bring the retailers on board, and there needs to be a consensus amongst everyone that's interested, all of the main actors and stakeholders within the value chain to promote it.
Nobody needs crisis in a product group, you know. So, but I have learned from another session today, you know, that you have to talk about stories. You know, you have to explain much better and the background. So, do you think a label, for example, would help here in this situation?
I think possibly there's enough labels already. I think that's one of the complaints that the public have, is that they're bombarded with all sorts of labels. You have MSC, ASC, you've got Freedom Foods in the UK for responsibly farmed animal welfare, you've got free trade, fair trade, sorry.
No label for trust.
Yeah, so I think a lot of the standards setters, they're looking for harmonisation between the standards. I think that's probably the better way forward, is that they become more inclusive of all of these issues and then they harmonise between themselves, is probably the better solution rather than any more labels.
Is there any question from the audience? No? So thank you very much. Oh.
All I would say is it's
People
never
can't
a mistake.
hear you, please. Can you use the microphone?
My comment would be it's never a mistake if something is labelled wild caught and it's farmed. It's economic fraud. And we need to deal with that and say it as it is. It's economic fraud. It's not mislabelling.
Okay.
Okay, thank you very much.